organizations for TIMET. In his role, he has responsibility for and visibility into all aspects of TIMET's supply chain. Henry?
Thanks, Don. Glad to be here on the first day of fall. It feels a little bit like winter in this room, but better than, they do no air conditioning here in Mobile. Excited to be here and hopefully build a little bit on the comments from the earlier presenters. The question of whether Boeing and Airbus get to 70 narrow bodies per month here in the next decade is one I'll review. There's big ifs involved there. If the cyclicality that this industry is accustomed to doesn't rear its head again due to economic conditions, and if the aviation markets can stay strong another 5 years, just like we've had the last 5, maybe we could get there. TIMET's a little skeptical about whether that's going to occur, and we'll review that here in the next 15 minutes. If you can stay awake and avoid the risks of paying attention. The commercial aerospace business has been cyclical. We'll review some of the drivers of that cyclicality and the various forecast considerations, talk about the future and what it might look like. The trend since 1955, when Douglas announced the DC-8, in 1956 when Boeing announced the 707, has been like a roller coaster. You could see the deliveries there in blue, peaks and valleys influenced by economic conditions and airline profitability and fuel costs, consumer demand and preferences, political conditions and military conflicts, globalization and international trade considerations. It's not easy to explain history, all the ups and downs, let alone to accurately predict what's going to happen in the future. There are a lot of uncertainties. Highlighted 3 of them here, and we'll review those now. Firstly, there are a lot of uncertainties surrounding the single-aisle market. Airbus, the A321 now accounts for 40% of the backlog of Airbus's single-aisle backlog. And it's accounting for some of their troubles in 2019, achieving the target rate that they had forecast. A couple of years ago, they reevaluated the A321neo and introduced the cabin flex concept in 2018. They've started to deliver it in 2019. Rather than the 4-door of the standard A321, they've reduced it to 3, but it's complex because they've given the airlines and their customers the option of 3 different placements of that 3rd door, which has made the production issues more challenging. Furthermore, in Paris this year, Airbus announced the XLR, extra long-range version of the 321neo, and has received 249 orders. And now the question is, where are they going to assemble it? Will it be in Hamburg, where they assemble the 320 today? Will it be here in Mobile, that many of you will be seeing here over the next couple of days? Perhaps in China, in Tianjin, where the A380 has been assembled. It appears the front runner is to build that XLR in Toulouse, but that decision is yet to be made here in the coming months. Will Airbus step its rate up to 70? What does the market need? Those questions are intermingled with economics and other uncertainties. And Boeing certainly has its hands full on the single aisle. The uncertainties surrounding the reintroduction of the MAX into service. There's talk about it occurring in the 4th quarter. There's a meeting today, I believe, in Montreal, where Boeing has invited 50 regulators from around the world to participate. There's a fear that the FAA may approve the MAX back into service here in Q4, but that some of the other regulatory agencies around the world might delay further their acceptance. This would set a dangerous precedent for airline safety, further complicate our lives going forward. Very important to see what will happen to the consumer confidence, the pilot's confidence in the new control system, and whether the flying public will be hesitant to get on board a MAX after as much publicity as it's received here in the last 12 months. So how will Boeing make it up? How fast will they make up those missed deliveries? What impact will it have on the supply chain? As you can see when you do the math here, the difference between 42 and 57 deliveries a month just on the airframe alone translates to 6 million pounds a year. And what will happen with oil prices? Will a recession occur? Will it impact oil prices? Low oil prices could delay deliveries of new generation of planes, reducing the return on investment on the premium that it costs in order to justify the fuel efficiency in the new models. $60 to $65 a barrel seems to be the sweet spot. If fuel goes down to the 40s, no longer is there the incentive for airlines to buy new planes. If it goes to the 70s, yeah, they need new planes, but as they go to raise prices to offset the costs, the higher costs of fuel, it could put a dampening effect on airline demand and have less passengers if they have to raise the fares to accommodate that. So something to watch very closely. And there's certainly lots of political issues going on around the world. The global economic growth, which was forecast to be above 3.5% this year, has now been reduced to less than 3%. It's a bit uneven. The U.S. appears to be doing better, but both Europe and China weakening a bit more. Just last week, though, the WTO announced that the U.S. Could go ahead on imposing up to $10 billion of tariffs on Airbus due to illegal subsidies. And 6 months from now, the WTO is due to rule on a counterclaim that Airbus made against Boeing, that Boeing has illegal subsidies. Sort of fits in with the trade talk uncertainty message that's going around and could have an impact on the EU's recertification of the MAX into service. Could be a pawn in the game between the U.S. and Europe on tariffs between Boeing and Airbus. So this chart looks funny as TIMET's forecast, and it's the imbalance that has occurred between the disconnect in the builds and the deliveries related upon the MAX. So with the expectation that only a little more than 1,200 planes are going to be delivered this year compared to more than 1,600 last year, reduces the titanium content of the planes delivered down from 89 to 82 million. However, that doesn't mean that the titanium hasn't been consumed by the supply chain, it just hasn't been delivered. Had that anomaly not occurred, you'd see a much smoother transition between 2018 and 2022. However, 2019 would have been really, when you consider the offset, the last growth year. And based upon the OEM's schedules for deliveries for the next couple years, putting the MAX aside, we're due for a fairly flat couple of years. The question, though, is what happens in the mid-range 3 to 5 years out? So reviewing the traffic and the backlog and the fleet mix a little bit will give us some insights. The historical growth in air traffic has been just under 5%. The last few years, 6.5% to 7%. 2018 up near 7.5%. This year, the growth in July year on year was only 3.6%. Year to date, 4.7%. So we're going to have a hard time hitting that 5% growth number for this year. Domestic traffic not impacted as much as international, where the growth, especially in recent months, has been a lot lower. So was that 6.5 to 7 we experienced for a few years the new normal, or below 5 again? Not real sure what's going to occur there. You have movement in several in Europe, in these, the Swedish environmental activists with their flight shaming concept, asking people to be responsible for their personal carbon footprint and to travel by train instead of by air. The French government has instituted an eco tax on air travel to be used to finance their rail transport system, again to attempt to be more environmentally friendly. Both of these are a long shot to take hold in the U.S., but they're potentially significant items to that growth. Backlogs are strong. Backlogs are diverse. There's a strong backlog in the single aisles and fairly strong in the wide bodies as well. It's both Boeing and Airbus are enjoying the situation, and interestingly, where's that demand coming from regionally? Well spread across the world, with no region having more than 25% of the backlog. But lead times are long, and as you saw from the cyclicality chart, the last few years orders have been weak, deliveries have been exceeding orders, that backlog has been declining. Well, what's the ideal lead time? If it gets too long, people start placing orders just to reserve a place in line. It leads to potentially dangerous ordering patterns and activities, could lead to more cyclicality. When the lead times get too short, it's difficult to make investment decisions and difficult to plan. So there's a question of whether the recent trend of a few years with low orders, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? What does the active fleet look like? In 2010, 80% of the fleet were single aisles. That dipped down by 2015 to only 71% as the Dreamliner rolled out and was delivered, and before the new single aisle editions started, and that's creeping back up to 81%. Question as to what that will look like in the future remains to be seen, and a lot will depend upon the shakeout here of things here on this page, not only the macro issues of the economics and trade, but also the question of technology. So the carbon fiber-based composites have been a big boom to titanium. What's next? The most dynamic battleground today is the middle of the market, broadly defined as 150 to 250 passengers and flying more than 3,000 miles. But really the key here is the 200 to 250 passenger segment and 5,000 miles or more. Typically, wide bodies have controlled the market between 250 and 350 passengers and 6,000 air miles and longer. But the desire for point-to-point travel is leading more to the middle of the market question. The Airbus A321 XLR is well positioned to hit the low end of that market and is due to be available by 2023, according to Airbus. But it doesn't easily accommodate the lay-flat seats, the premium seats that business travelers like. And so there's some question as to whether there's still space in that market for a different solution. Boeing is considering the high end with a new mid-size aircraft, potentially to be called the 797, designed more for international service in the upper side of that range. It's a clean sheet design. They've been mulling it for a few years. Rumor has it that the announcement is pending right around the end of this year, and that they're targeting 2025 entry into service with their track record. I'm not sure I would bet on that happening, but that would be a big change. So what will Boeing decide to do? They've conservatively estimated that demand at 4,000 to 5,000 middle-of-the-market jets over 20 years, but they're also considering a new clean sheet future single aisle, the FSA, that's estimated would cost $15 billion to develop and bring to market. And with the, can they bite off both the NMA and the FSA at the same time, especially while they're still sorting through the ramifications of the MAX? Hard pressed to believe that Boeing would go in both of those directions here at the same time. So if there's no NMA, does that make an FSA more likely? I would tend to think so, but we'll see what happens. Competitive considerations are big right now. Airbus has a strong position in the single aisle market. Boeing has a stronger position in the wide body market. Can Airbus leverage that position to sell more wide bodies? Does Boeing play offense or does Boeing play defense here? Maybe we'll get some insights in the presentations from Jeff and Laurent here in the next couple days, and as that gets sorted out here in the coming months. And lastly, electric plane. Recently, a 5-passenger version flew in the Los Angeles area. They replaced one of the engines with an electric motor that powered the propeller in the back of the plane. The prop in the front of the plane was still powered by a traditional combustion engine. Also, the industry is investigating vertical takeoff and landing vehicles for intercity shuttling of commuters to avoid traffic in major cities. Uber plans to launch Uber Elevate in 2023. And they've actually identified Dallas, Los Angeles, and Melbourne as the 3 trial cities as to where that is going to occur. I'm not sure I'm ready for a driverless car, let alone an electric airplane, but we'll see. And Airbus is also reportedly investigating replacing a turbofan with an electric motor in a trial-only event. They're not looking to introduce that model, but clearly they're looking at it. Today, smaller planes are being retrofitted. This, combined with the carbon footprint environmental movement, leads you to wonder, will this be part of our future? It's clearly not impossible. Hopefully, this has given you some things to ponder about what the future might hold. I'm hopeful that we can maintain this super cycle for another 5 years, that we can get to 70 single aisles. There's a lot going on in the world, and I wouldn't bet on it, but time will tell. Thank you very much.